time for my wedding and I wanted my dad to give me away, and I asked him to do one simple thing, is to get measured so he could have a tuxedo. For some stupid reason, it was really important to me that he had that same tuxedo as everybody else in the pictures. Now I realize how ridiculous those tuxedos looked. That was 32 years ago. They looked ridiculous, and my dad's suit that he ended up wearing to the wedding was timeless, and it still would have worked even today. And he never got measured, and so I had my stepfather at the time walk me down the aisle. What a colossal, stupid little kid mistake to make. For a long time I was really hurt that he wouldn't do that one tiny little thing for me. And I was, immature. I didn't realize how stupid it was to even worry about that. Honestly, if I could have done it all over, I would have gone out and gotten married on top of a mountaintop with my mom and my dad and my brother and my husband's siblings and his parents, and that would have been it, and that would have been so cool. But I didn't. I worried about what everybody else thought and what society thought a wedding was supposed to be, and I believe I called him after my first daughter was born, and then he just had kind of disappeared again. And so it was years, probably about 5 or 6 years before he contacted me again. And I remember that phone call vividly because it was the same thing. Every time he would disappear and you pick up the phone and he'd say, "I bet you don't know who this is. Can you guess who this is?" And every time, you know your dad's voice, you know right away. And so I would say, "Yeah, I know who it is, Dad. Hey, good to hear from you." And that was the visit where he came to my home with his mom. And after that, I didn't hear from him. Oh man, I don't know. I guess it was when my mom passed away. And that was like 10, 12 years later. We actually were the ones that tracked him down and found him. And I was kind of bitter. And I remember my brother immediately was much more forgiving. He's always quicker to that step than I am. I did come out for a visit, my husband and I, and our son, who was very small. At that point, something did feel different. He started to call me about every 3 weeks or so. And there was a part of me that didn't want to answer the phone when he would call, because I still felt like any second you're going to disappear again. You're going to be gone. And my brother kept saying, "Something's changed in him, Tammy. Something's changed." And I thought, you always say this. You always give people that second chance, and then they burn you, and then you're hurt. But I listened. And so I did start to look forward to those calls. And then the whole, my husband being offered this job out here, which just happened to be 10 miles down the road, thing kind of happened. And we ended up here, and he had given me the home that was on the property. Even when we got here, I wasn't willing to really give him my whole heart. I loved him because he was my dad, but I was very protective of myself and of my children. And what I noticed right away was the way he loved my kids. And they really didn't know. They didn't really even know they had a grandpa, because he hadn't been in our lives, and I didn't want to hurt them. And so I hadn't really even introduced them to a lot of the stories and stuff. But man, did he love those kids. And he invested in those kids. He was one of those grandpas that would come in every day. He would stop by and he would sit down and he'd pat him on the knee and he'd say, "Sydney, we're Aubrey or Miranda or whoever, how was your day? What'd you do today? You talk to any of those hairy-legged boys? He'd sing silly songs with the little kids. He let Ari put curlers in his hair and do all this silly stuff. He let the girls paint his fingernails. He would stop by and say, hey, can I take, and he'd name one or two of them, to lunch or to dinner. And it was always a rotation. So if he took these two, then he was gonna take these the next time, and these the next time. And he would take them into these restaurants because he ate every meal out, and he knew everybody around here. And you know, the regulars always ate kind of together. It was like their own little family. And he'd bring them in and he would just show them off because those were his grandkids. He was so proud of them. And over the 7 years that he was alive while we lived here, he made those kids feel so incredibly loved and cherished. And what it did was it started to put a crack in my ridiculously hard heart. That protective shell that I had built up because of my own hurts where my dad was concerned. And it started to make me see him in such a new light. And I remember thinking, and I probably said it to my brother at one point, man, I wish the grandpa that these kids have was the dad that we could have had. How amazing would that have been? But seeing that my kids got that, guys, you just don't even know. Even the ones that lived on the other side of the country, he asked about them daily. Daily. How are they? And he would remember things that I had told him. Oh, well, what about this or what about that? He was so happy when my oldest daughter's youngest was born. So excited. And to hold a little baby in his hands, like you could see how uncomfortable he was with it, but at the same time, it was like this cool, these were his people. His people. And the way he would talk to me about the kids. And I realized even then what a gift I had. My dad was a hoarder. If you watched the show Hoarders, that was my dad. My dad was a hoarder. My dad was someone who did not clean himself the way I would have liked. You know, he would shower and all of that, but he was a smoker, and so there was always the smell of cigarettes about him, and sometimes he'd go a day or two without taking a shower, and so he'd be a little greasy, and he was a construction worker, so he could, you know, all of that. But man, that guy could give well thought out advice. Like no one I've probably ever had in my life. He was never quick to give me an answer. When I would bring up something that had been bothering me, or he'd ask about a kid and I'd, you know, be like, well, here's what happened at school or whatever, and they're in trouble or something, which, you know, isn't a big thing. None of my kids have ever been that bad. But you'd see him sit there, and sometimes it'd be a while. Sometimes we'd even change the subject, and you could see he was thinking, and he'd come back later and he'd be, you know, and he'd give me some piece of advice that would make me just go, who are you? Who are you? Like, who are you? You're giving me advice, like stuff that just would blow my mind, and I would think, oh, I hate that you're so right. And I miss two things the most. about my dad. I miss knowing that it didn't matter what time of day or night. It didn't matter where you were. If you had an emergency, he was there. Immediately. He was there. And I don't have that anymore. And the second thing is I miss his incredible advice. He never forced it on me, never forced me to take his advice, but he would offer this gentle wisdom in a way that just I miss. So I cannot tell you how many times since then, and he's been gone for 3 years now, that I have stopped and thought, oh, I wish I had my dad here. Because the advice was always so gentle. And it never made you feel stupid. It never made you feel pushed into a corner. And let's be honest, I really miss his hugs because he never, ever, ever left this house without wrapping his arms around me and telling me he loved me. He was a gift for all the negative, for all of that bad stuff that I had to go through as a kid. He gave my kids the very best gift in the world. And I will always, always love him and be grateful for that. Because those 8 kids are literally the most important thing in this world to me. Never take your parents for granted. If you haven't lost them, you are so lucky. Because nobody is here forever. So I was looking around at pictures and I thought, I could show a lot of pictures of when my dad was younger. I inherited all that stuff, all of his mother's pictures and his pictures. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to show the pictures from the 7 years that he was here with us when he loved us so beautifully. This is one of my favorite photos of my dad. He was the thinker. This is a photo of me and my dad, not real long after we had moved here. Probably maybe 6 months after we'd moved here, maybe not even that long. Always the work. This man worked hard. He did his whole life. It was something that he just was never quite able to give up. I mean, he worked almost till his last day. Here's a beautiful, one of my favorite pictures of him and my youngest daughter, Ari. And she's literally putting curlers in his hair. And he loved that girl. On his deathbed, he sang the I Love You, You Love Me song with her. This is a picture of my dad sitting at one of Bryson's baseball games because this man never, ever missed one of Bryson's games. He would come and he would sit and he would watch and he would encourage him, and it didn't matter if Bryson played well or if he was the worst one on the team that night. He supported him and encouraged him.